Hello, everybody. Welcome in person and online. We're thrilled to have you with us tonight. My name is Lizzie Meister, and I'm the Public Programs Manager here at the Museum of the Southern Jewish Experience. In just a moment, I'm going to introduce our wonderful guests, Lauren and Ben. But before we get deep into this fascinating conversation, I also want to pull up my colleague, Cindy, to talk a little bit about the Museum of the Southern Jewish Experience's Mensch Match right now, which is a really cool opportunity. So, Cindy, take it away.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for being here tonight and having to
No, scooch in.
Hi. Thanks everyone so much for being here at the museum and on screen on Zoom. I'm Cindy. I'm the new membership manager here at the museum. I want to thank everyone again for being here, and especially our members. Our members are the people who help keep these programs free and make them possible for us to have. Right now, we are having a membership campaign in particular for everyone who signs up or renews as a recurring member. We will get a match from an anonymous donor. So if you have any questions about that, please reach out to me here at the museum or my email, cindy@msje.org. I'd love to talk to you. Now I'm going to hand it back to Lizzie.
Thank you. We're actually going to do our announcements at the start of this conversation. So that when we're in this conversation, we're in it. So upcoming things at the Museum of the Southern Jewish Experience. After this conversation, we, much like the other part of the Jewish world, take a little bit of a break. I'm early wishing you a happy new year, Shana Tova. And for Sukkot 2025, we will be building a sukkah on our roof. So please join us throughout Sukkot for a variety of events, including a membership, sips in the sukkah, a young adult happy hour, lunch and lounge, harvest havdalah in the sukkah. So much to do during Sukkot here at the Museum of the Southern Jewish Experience. And then at the end of October, we are going to dive deep into history, Southeast Louisiana Jewish history with Brian Costello. And more information can be found about both of those programs on our website, msje.org/events. Now we are thrilled to welcome everybody to this. There will be a Q&A at the end. So people in person, same rules apply, put your hand up and talk. But people online, we ask that you pop your questions in the chat and then somebody on site will read them aloud. Pop your questions in the chat as they come to your head. And without further ado, I would like to introduce our two speakers here today. Ben. Ben is a native of Mississippi, Benjamin Morris, and is the author of 1 book of nonfiction and 3 books of poetry, most recently, The Singing River. He holds an MSc in creative writing from the University of Edinburgh and a PhD in archaeology from the University of Cambridge. His work has appeared in the Oxford American, Lit Hub, and the Southern Review, and received fellowship from the Mississippi Arts Commission and Tulane University. He lives here in New Orleans. And he is in conversation with Lauren Rhoades, author of Split the Baby. She is a writer and editor living in Jackson, Mississippi, originally from Denver, Colorado. Lauren has served with AmeriCorps, started Mississippi's first fermentation company, and helmed the Eudora Welty House and Garden. She is now director of grants at the Mississippi Arts Commission and a host of MPB's The Mississippi Arts Hour. In 2022, Lauren founded Rooted Magazine, a best-selling Substack publication dedicated to telling unfiltered stories about what it means to call Mississippi home. She holds an MFA in creative writing from the Mississippi University for Women. Her debut memoir, Split the Baby, a memoir in pieces, was published in June 2025. Without further ado, I want to let you two take it away. Thanks so much,
Lizzie.
Thank you so much for having us. This is a total joy, Lauren. It is an absolute honor to get to work alongside you and read this book and dive into so many fabulous questions that it raises. I'm so glad we could do this.
Me too. Thank you for being here.
Total joy. So we thought that the only appropriate thing to do to get the evening kicked off would be to hear from the book itself. So Lauren is going to get things going with a reading just of a short passage, and we will come back to the book at the very end of our conversation later this evening. But for now, Lauren, take it away.
Sure. So I'm going to read from the very beginning of the book, the first essay. So I'll read the opening of the essay and then the very close of the essay, just to give you a little taste, and then we can jump into conversation. And this will also give you insight into the title if you haven't already guessed where the title comes from. Split the baby. I never liked the Solomon story. You know the one. Two women come to the wise King Solomon, both claiming to be the mother of the same baby. King Solomon tells the women that since there's no way to know who the real mother is, he'll just cut the baby in half. One woman calmly accepts his proposal. The other falls to the floor, pleading that Solomon not harm the child, that he let the other woman raise the baby. This display of maternal selflessness is all the proof Solomon needs to identify the real mother. The baby is hers. I first heard this story as a child in Hebrew school. As I sat in the carpeted floor that smelled like lemon cleaning solution, I wondered why the first woman was so ready to accept half a baby, or rather, a dead baby. Surely even a non-mother would prefer a live child to a dead one. And what if King Solomon's plan had backfired? Even his false proposal of infanticide seemed strange and cruel. The story nagged at me with all its horrible possibilities, its myriad loopholes. But I also couldn't help but dwell on the idea of cutting a baby in half. I was obsessed with the violent and graphic Hans Christian Andersen fairy tales, especially the one where the little girl begs an executioner to chop off her feet because they won't stop dancing. My mom actually hid that book from us because she hated reading it to us so much. And in the Torah, God was always coming up with creative and horrific punishments, wiping out entire cities, killing off the Egyptians' firstborn children, making the Jews wander in a desert for 40 years, flooding the world, slicing a baby down the middle, splitting its skull like two halves of a peach, didn't seem completely far-fetched. In my own gruesome version of the story, the baby survives, and each woman leaves the palace with half a baby cradled to her chest, one arm, one kicking leg, one watchful eyeball, one dimpled butt cheek. Each half baby would grow to be a half child, half adult, half a mouth, half a brain. Haunted by the desire to be whole between the disparate worlds and needs of my divorced parents. Every child wants to be wanted, and I was wanted, but I did not understand the depth of that desire, its bitter vastness. This is what the wise king knew, that it is possible to become a fanatic of wanting, wanting what you cannot have, depriving others of what you yourself are deprived. That bitterness can taste sweet, like honey drizzled on unripe fruit. Nevertheless, the body remains indivisible, singular, whole. Think about the Solomon story now, I think of my mother and stepmother and their bitter showdowns over who was the real mother and who was the imposter. Perhaps, as one psychologist suggested, my stepmother Crystal was unaware of the quote underlying thrived on competition, on the thrill of a fight, even as my mother retreated like a wounded gazelle. The Solomon story played out over and over again in the absence of any judge or jury. Being in the same space as my mother and stepmother meant breathing with a sandbag on my chest. Time would slow and the mental calculations would begin. Who would I sit next to? How long would I speak with each parent? Would I wave goodbye or cross the room to give a hug? Each word, each gesture became freighted with meaning as the two versions of myself played a violent game of tug-of-war inside my gut. Though it pains me now to admit it, if pressed into choosing a side, I would most often choose Crystal. It was easier that way. My mom loved me unconditionally, whereas Crystal had the power to make my life a living hell. I wouldn't have blamed my mother if in the interest of self-preservation, she had contemplated the possibility of giving me up, letting my stepmother have me if that's what I wanted. But my mother never relinquished me. She clung tightly to the half that was hers, even as I pushed her away. In the end, Crystal left without saying goodbye, without a fight or a final parting word, to me at least. I was 19, a sophomore in college when my father told me she was gone. She has this switch, he said, and once you flip it off, you can't flip it back on. He explained how Crystal had come to believe I was a spy for my mother, even though I was living in a dorm an hour away. I had sensed that Crystal had been pulling away from me ever since I left for college. It had been months since we had spoken, but now it seemed as though my father was talking about a stranger. After all, it was my mother I had spied on, not my stepmother. Had Crystal only wanted me as her daughter so that my mother could not have me? Perhaps the simplest explanation was the right one. Crystal was jealous of Mom. When she knew she couldn't have all of me, she chose nothing. I was left to ponder what this meant now for my life, my future. I was alone, standing on the cold stone floor of the palace, facing the judgment of my past. Maybe I could become whole again. My ears, my eyes, my brain, my body unsplit. Thank you.
Now I have to say, I mean, if you guys thought that that was good, just wait till you read the essay after that and the essay after that and the piece that comes after that. I just recently finished reading this book in its entirety, and I can honestly say that each new essay is like a fishhook that just gets set deeper and deeper and deeper, and Lauren is reeling the reader in the whole time. And it is just the most glorious feeling. I love this book. It is smart, it is curious, it is honest, it is funny, it is wise. These are all lethal things to have together, right? And Lauren is bringing this innate skill of a memoirist to her work. The first question I have
you, Ben.
for you, well, it's true. The first question I have for you is, how did it come about? What is actually the origin story of this book?
So this originally started as my MFA thesis. So I started my MFA program in 2018. It was a low residency program. And I knew I wanted to write creative nonfiction, and I was unsure of what my thesis would be. It had to be a book-length project. And initially, actually, I was thinking of writing a collection of essays about Southern Jewish culture because it was just so fascinating to me as a transplant from Colorado. But then I realized that if I was going to do that, I would have to examine my own Jewish identity. And in order to do that, I would have to go back and think about how I was raised and think about the Catholic part of my upbringing as well, and then get into everything with my parents. And so I wrote an essay. I did this creative writing residency at the Yiddish Book Center in Massachusetts. And so I wrote an essay about all of that, my childhood, in one 7-page essay. And after that, I realized, okay, what I was trying to cram into 7 pages needed to actually be expanded into an entire book. And so that's when I was like, okay, I'm going to actually sit down and expand this idea into a book-length collection.
I just have one question. Was that 7-page essay? Was that in like 4-point type that you managed to kind of fit all of that in there?
It wasn't very good. It was a really bad essay. And people were so kind to me when they were reading. We were workshopping together, and everybody brought in these like very polished pieces. And I brought this like messy, very genuine, heartfelt essay, and people were very kind. And then I realized like, I need to just scrap this and start over.
You know, some memoirists will say that the idea for a book arrives sort of fully formed in their mind, and they just kind of have to get the whole thing out. They can see the whole landscape all in one view, and then it's just up to them to put their butt in the chair and kind of get the work done and get the thing out of their system. Other memoirists will say that the landscape emerges gradually, right? You see one piece at a time, and then you round the bend, and then you see another piece, and you can kind of gradually get the sense of what the book was about. So I guess my question would be, as you began to conceptualize this, was it kind of an all at once sort of thing, or was it gradual and sort of like a dawning?
Yeah, I would say it was more of a gradual. I had like touch points that I knew I wanted to write about. And so I had just all of these sticky notes on my wall. Like one was like, okay, the bat mitzvah. I know I'm going to have to write about my bat mitzvah. Another one was my conversion to Catholicism. I knew I had to get to that chapter, a chapter about my brother. And so as I moved along, I would just kind of take those sticky notes down. And then sometimes one sticky note would turn into 3 sticky notes, or sometimes they would combine. So I didn't write it chronologically, but I felt that, you know, when I was arranging it, it does mostly follow a chronological arc. But I just, as ideas would occur to me of like, this is something I need to write about now, or that I'm willing to write about now, I would dive into them.
And it is true. Memoirists will also tell you that sometimes you only have the capacity to engage one particular subject at a time as it swells up in memory and you become sort of focused on that, and you kind of have to get that one out of your system before you can move to.
It felt less intimidating that way too, rather than being like, I'm writing a book, like I'm just writing this one small piece of a book.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have to break it down into bite-sized chunks. Now, you have teed up two of the questions that I have for you, actually, one of which is absolutely about your bat mitzvah. It's an amazing chapter, one of my absolute favorite chapters in the book.
Cool.
We'll come to that in a little bit. The question that I have right up front, though, is part of the story of this book involves material that you never expected to find, partly because you did not even know that it existed. And I'm referring, of course, to what you call the parenting diaries or the parenting reports in the book. It's this fascinating sort of mini archive that you were oblivious to for most of your life until one day you discovered it. Tell us about that.
Well, this is the amazing thing when you start writing about your family, everyone kind of they're like, oh, well, you need to write about this thing, or like, maybe let me find this document that you should have. And so I had told my mom and stepdad that I was, writing essays about my childhood for my thesis. And my stepdad was like, well, I think I have some files you might need to see. And so through 2 different across the country moves, he had saved all of these legal and very personal documents in the basement. And honestly, my mom couldn't even believe he had saved them because a lot of them were, dealt with very painful memories. And so he sent me this, what was called a parenting evaluation. It was a 76-page legal document that was written by a forensic psychologist who was court ordered to talk to our family, kind of determine the custody arrangements for my family. And so it took place in 1996. I was 7, my brother was 4. And over the course of a couple of months, he visited both of our households, my mom's household, my dad's. We went to his office and he observed how each parent would play with me and my brother and how we would react. And after spending a lot of time with us, he made up these recommendations and he recorded his observations and, detailed quotes from conversations he had had with each of us. And I mean, for a memoirist, this was like a gold mine because it was a primary document with like actual descriptions of my family from a literally unbiased, objective professional. And so I was able to, even though it was a very small slice of life, that was really valuable to draw on as I wrote about different memories that were maybe fuzzy to me, but I had this document. And then the parenting diary was actually, my mother had kept a notebook. And again, just over the course of a year, during the time I was 10 and 11, it was a very difficult time in terms of the custody arrangements. And she was essentially keeping, it was like evidence for her lawyer. And so she would write down observations of what my brother and I were doing, or like if we had refused custody time with her, she would write down the time stamps of when we had done that. And it was this was the first time I had seen it. And so it was a really painful document just to like be in that headspace of my mother. But it was also so valuable to me because I was in my 30s, my early 30s. So I was closer to my mom's age at that time than I was to like my childhood self that I was writing about. And so in many ways, I related more to my mother's perspective. And I was also pregnant with my daughter. And so I was imagining like, what kind of mother do I want to be? What would it be like if this was happening to my own child? And so I asked her permission if I could include pieces of her parenting diary in the book, and she graciously said yes. I mean, she's also an excellent writer, so that helped too. But I chose 5 different selections from her parenting diary and then responded to them in some way.
It is incredible what we find when we start either asking around, sort of poking our nose where it doesn't belong,
Yeah.
Turning over logs. I have a friend here in town who only discovered he was adopted by finding the scrap of an envelope, the top left corner of the return address from the adoption center in New Jersey, and sort of wondering, what is this return address? I've never seen this before, in an attic in his parents' house. And he sort of put in the address and discovered there was an adoption facility there, right? And then he began this sort of 15-year journey to discover that he was adopted. You know, just, you never know what you're going to find.
Yeah.
The question that I have for you, Lauren, and this really hits home as you read your book. It hits hard. I'm not afraid to say that. It's a very moving, very profound recognition that what you have as you work through these diaries and these reports is the opportunity to stand in two temporal planes at once. You have a foot in the past and a foot in the present, but more than that, you have a tension between what you remember of your own life as a child of that age, at 7 with the psychologist, and then a little later with your mother's diaries. You remember your own life and your own memories, but you also have someone remembering your childhood for you,
Yeah.
which is so rare and so unusual and poignant in a way. I mean, you have competing visions of what you think reality was in those years, because you say, I think I remember some of this, but I can't be sure, and I might have to reconstruct a little bit of it. What was it like working through reading these documents and working through with them as a writer yourself in that moment?
Yeah, thank you for that question. It was, I write in the book that it was like reading a fairy tale about myself. And it was a very out of body experience reading someone's observations of you as a child. And yeah, it was in some ways though, it was actually very healing, because I carried a lot of like shame and regret and wishing that I had done things differently, even though I knew I was a kid, and you know, I should give yourself grace as for decisions you have as a child. But being able to read like a psychological professional's description of your parents and you, it was like, oh yeah, I was a 7-year-old. And so that was really freeing in some ways, and really healing. But it was also just so valuable, because I think, you know, memories, and as a memoirist, I'm very aware that memory is a slippery thing. Like I even wrote about Dr. Katz as like a balding man, and then I talked with him on Zoom and he had a full head of hair, and I was like, clearly I misremembered this man. But yeah, it was just such a gift to be able to have those records, and a gift to be able to have my mom talking through those experiences in her own words, and not through the filter of like what she might have told me in retrospect.
Yeah. Now, I want to segue slowly into the question of the split identity, the sort of the Jewish identity here in the South. I want to come to that momentarily, but there's one more thing we have to just get right out in front, because your book just gravitates to this concept over and over again. It is something which consumes you as a writer, in some ways, and it's this notion of doubling the self, of a divided self, of a self which is sometimes hiding depending on which location you're in and which sort of family unit you're with. There's a sense of experience and reality being refracted through the immediate context that you're in. There are these all throughout the book, Lauren, you're just grappling with what was it like for this young person to have to just navigate multiple identities in a way that went far beyond code switching, right? This is much deeper than code switching. I have a wonderful passage I would love for you to read for us, which is on page 19. It's the first sort of full paragraph that begins with the word identity. Would you just read that for us? Because I think it really sums up kind of one of the core concerns of what you're working with here.
Okay. This is from a chapter where I really talk about religion a lot. Identity is a concept that I don't understand yet. My identity is just a collection of traits, a bingo card of belonging and not belonging. I am a girl, a blonde, blue-eyed girl, a blonde, blue-eyed Jewish girl, a blonde, blue-eyed Jewish girl who celebrates Christmas. I pick up the pieces of myself that I've been given and put them together, puzzling out what they mean. Soon I will begin to see the contradictions inherent in myself. I will learn to camouflage and contort, to become a mirror, reflecting back the girl that others think they want to see. But for now, I am wholly me. This is who I am.
It's a marvelous passage, and this is when you're very young, and a couple of years later, you sort of fast forward. There's on page 31, there's another passage which I love. It starts at the very, very bottom of the page where you say, "At 12 years old." This is just marvelous writing. Just that tiny little paragraph that goes over to the next page.
Okay.
Yeah.
You did your homework, Ben.
I did. I love this book. What can I say?
Yeah, this is the bat mitzvah chapter.
Mhm.
Okay. At 12 years old, I am a master of obfuscation and omission, a tiny PR executive gliding on the line between truth and lie. I am so good that I don't even realize what I'm doing. Sometimes I censor not just my words, but my own thoughts, so that later I will wonder if what I remember is an edited version of what actually occurred, safe for consumption.
So I have a million questions about this. I mean, but the first one is what was it like for you to take that concept of the divided self as a through line through the whole of the memoir? Because this is a condition and a reality that you are constantly grappling with all throughout your childhood and adolescence. And you're very honest about that in this book. There's no sort of shirking the topic here. What was it like to have to work with that as one of the major threads of narrative here?
Yeah, part of it was when I wrote that first essay, Split the Baby, which was originally called Solomon's Story, I went through a number of different names, but I think that's when I realized like what the heart of this collection or this memoir was like. How was I divided and how was I working to become a whole person? But in many ways, it probably would have just come out. I mean, it did come out naturally just because that was really it was a preoccupation for me as a child. Like I was very conscious. I had heard the term multiple personality disorder without even really knowing what that meant. But I was like, I must have that because I am so different when I'm with my dad versus with my mom. And I, of course, did not. But I thought something just must be wrong with me. But that was because there was such totally different expectations at each household and such totally different ways of being in the world. I mean, in terms of religion and political identity, in terms of like how you should be as a person.
There's different snacks.
There's different snacks.
There's different snacks. Anytime you go to
We
your
couldn't
mom's
have
house, you get the
clothes
good
transferring.
snacks.
Yeah.
You go to your dad's and your stepmom's, and it's like you're lucky to get a carrot stick. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, that literally was true. I mean, there was some weird food issues happening at that house, but understatement.
I was traumatized by the bad snacks at your father and stepmom's. I just have to say that,
Yeah. So it was just, yeah, it was one of those things that I was very preoccupied about. And I thought, how will I ever become like, what will I be like when I leave home? And in retrospect, I think I was really overthinking it. Because I actually recently saw this Instagram reel that was like, is your kid being really weird around you? And it was like, that's a good thing because if your kid's acting weird around you, they feel comfortable being weird and like being their normal self. And when I was at my mom's house, I was like totally a weirdo, always doing goofy things. When I was with my best friend at her parents' house, I was very weird. It was only when I was with my father and stepmother did I feel like I had to like tamp down who I was because for them, weird was like the worst thing you could be. You did not want to be weird. And that goes hand in hand with how they thought about Jews, my stepmother in particular. So, yeah, that's in retrospect, that was very clear to me.
And you write that, we'll come to the South in just a second, but you write that in that part of Colorado, the Jewish population was not very large. In fact, it had been persecuted during the time of the Klan. You had a sort of interesting moment when you look at your Catholic grandfather and kind of wondered whether he was swept up in some of that, of the persecution of Jews and Catholics by the Klan out west and so forth. But how would you describe, I mean, what was it like growing up in a Jewish household in that part of the West in particular?
I knew that most of my classmates were Christian, but we actually had I went to school with Muslims and Hindus, and there were other Jewish kids in my class, and we had a pretty large temple that we went to, a Reform synagogue. So I never felt like there's no one like me, in terms of there being a Jewish community. So it always felt like a Jewish community did exist. Although I guess in some ways it could be similar to it's not New York.
Right.
So,
right, exactly.
but it was a relatively religiously diverse community. Yeah.
How has it been? You have recently moved to the South some years ago. You moved around a little bit. You had some sort of adventures, which you describe in the book, and those are great. But you settled in the South, some years ago. And what has your experience been sort of reconnecting with Jewish faith, custom practice, and so forth in this part of the country?
Yeah, so I moved to Jackson, Mississippi in 2013. I moved here for an AmeriCorps position and just really, I met Lizzie in Mississippi and Jackson. Just really loved the South and in particular Mississippi and Jackson, where I still live. And after I left for college, I had basically a falling out with religion. I was like, I am done with religion. I'm done with people telling me what to do and what to believe. And then when I moved to Jackson, there just started to be kind of like a reawakening in me of, I feel different than culturally different, as a transplant. Being in the South from Colorado is just very different, not in a bad way, just there was a lot of things to learn. But also I was very aware that I was in a religious minority in Mississippi. Just religion is more central to the community experience, and even just have a blessed day. It's just more top of mind for people. And so I just started feeling like I need to investigate my own Jewishness. And interestingly, the Institute for Southern Jewish Life is in Jackson. And so because there's a lot of transplants that move to Jackson to work at the Institute for Southern Jewish Life, I had quite a few Jewish friends for being in a place that doesn't have a lot of Jews in it, period. And so that was really reaffirming to me and just got me really interested in what is Jewish culture in the South? How do I feel Jewish? What makes me feel Jewish innately? And then especially when I had my daughter, my husband was raised Baptist. And so ironically, I'm putting my child in a similar situation to what I was in, just having parents of different faiths. But he's is fine with her being raised Jewish. He doesn't practice his religion anymore. And so that in itself, being a parent of a Jewish child, how do I make sure that she feels connected to her own culture and her religion is really important to me, and something I'm still thinking through of what's the best way to do that. But that all coincided with Mississippi.
These are such wonderful questions. And I think that anytime parenthood arrives on the horizon, we begin to sort of interrogate these things afresh. You asked this great question, which is, what does it mean to be Jewish in the South? And I'm a bog standard white guy, I'm not going to try to say what that means. I would never be so presumptuous. But, as a historian, I did have to research this a little bit when I was writing the history of the city of Mississippi, of history of Hattiesburg. And as I spoke to Jewish friends and colleagues there about, what was life like, particularly in the civil rights era, I got some really interesting answers. And one of them that would come up from time to time is that you always had a foot in both worlds, right? I mean, you have a foot, you have your Jewish community, but you also have a foot in, the sort of the Anglo world, but you also have a foot kind of in the African-American world, right? There's this sort of sense of always crossing borders, right? And I always really appreciated that. I love the section in your book where you describe the moment that your father and your stepmother come to your bat mitzvah. It is just such an amazing moment in that particular chapter. And it reminded me of, it's pretty rare for white folks to be the only in a room. You know what I mean? It's white folks tend to have a bit of a dominant kind of presence. And so like, there's probably going to be a white person somewhere in a room. And it's not sorry, good thing, it just is. But I've been in rooms where I've been the only white guy in a Dominican funeral and a Black Baptist church and so forth. That experience is rare. And for your father and stepmother, right? It's like you saw something happen at your bat mitzvah there as they're sitting there trying to make sense out of all this. What was that moment like for you? It's extraordinary chapter.
So I'll just like put a little bit of context there. So my mom really wanted me to have a bat mitzvah, and I was more on the fence, mainly because I didn't want my Catholic stepmother and father to be there. And so I spent this whole year being that little PR executive, like not really telling them what I was doing. I was like, oh, it's just going to be a party at the, that's what the bat mitzvah is, just a little party. You guys don't have to come. Like, please don't come.
Please don't come.
And of course they were going to come. And so it was like all of my Jewish family came, and it was a relatively small for the bat mitzvah for where I grew up. Like there was country club, bar and bat mitzvah parties. But this one, I really wanted it to be small, and my mom like really went through customizing all aspects of the bat mitzvah to make it very special. And my great aunt Hetty tutored me in Hebrew, and my grandfather, who's the son of a rabbi, like did all this extra learning with me. And so it was a lot of preparation that I completely didn't tell my dad and stepmother about. And so when they show up, they just didn't know what to expect. And it was a complete reversal of them being, which they usually just kind of, my stepmother especially, would just like suck the oxygen out of a room, and it was all about her. But in that moment, they were kind of like, a little bit shell-shocked maybe, or just like shrunken. They didn't seem like the outsized presence that I normally felt when I was around her. And her father, who was Italian Catholic, and I don't think he had ever met any Jewish people before he met me and my brother. So, it was an experience where I was like, maybe they're going to get it. Like maybe they're going to understand these two parts of me. But of course, after the bat mitzvah, is like there was a lot of backlash from them, unfortunately. Yeah.
Yeah, there's always going to be a little bit of a kind of an aftermath that we have to contend with. But I understand that you absolutely crushed the recitation and the
Thank
singing.
you.
Like, well done, well done.
Not a lot of practice.
There it is. There it is. It is interesting because that chapter does tie into one of these dominant themes that you describe in the book, of this kind of hiding, of this negotiating your identity depending on where you write that you did not even tell your father and stepmother that you were learning biblical Hebrew. I mean, that itself was kind of concealed from them. You had your Hebrew lessons with once a week and so forth. I mean, it's just a remarkable kind of struggle to have to face, to kind of, I don't know, like hide that part of yourself, which is emerging and flowering in this moment. And you can't even tell them that you're learning a new language.
Yeah, it was like, when you're learning you're practicing for your bat mitzvah, it was like I was constantly hearing those melodies in my head. And I just wouldn't say them out loud when I was over there. Yeah.
So I'm currently learning biblical Hebrew right now, and I can tell you, just telling the difference between a kametz and a kametz hatuf is enough for me in this moment. But to memorize all of that, I am so impressed. I am absolutely just staggered. And from memory too.
A lot of it hasn't stuck. I'm now I teach 4 5th graders at Beth Israel religious school. And so I'm very unqualified to be their teacher, but we're learning Hebrew together. So it's a fun experience.
I love it. I love it. So that raises another question, which is because of the way, I want to leave some time for folks in the audience to ask a couple of questions as well, but 1 or 2 more here. Because you write so vividly about what it was like to be a divided child, a child who had to constantly negotiate her identity depending on her context, and a child who was sort of staring down the barrel of one parent who wanted to control who you were, which was your stepmother, right? And one parent who wanted to allow you to choose who you wanted to be, to connect with your ancestral tradition, but also to decide for yourself. There was an element of your mother's sort of liberty there. I wanted to ask you, you are a parent now, you do have a young daughter. What advice would you give to a reader of your book, or even any young person out there who is listening and thinking through these things and grappling with these issues? What advice would you give to a young person who maybe is growing up bicultural, biracial, bireligious, sort of like caught between worlds, right? Crossing those same boundaries. What would you want to say to them?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because those fifth graders that I mentioned, we all realized on the first day of class that all of us have a non-Jewish parent. And so I think that's a really beautiful thing, that we were all choosing to be in the synagogue, learning. Well, maybe the children aren't choosing for themselves. Some of them, their parents want them to go, but they have parents that come from two different cultural backgrounds and are still supporting this journey of them becoming Jewish and exploring that side of their identity. And so I think that one of the things that I really value about my upbringing was I did get to have these two insights into two very different religious experiences, cultural experiences. And I don't think that in itself is a bad thing. I think that is that's a gift, to be able to experience and identify with different people and different cultures, and it can contribute to a more open mind, I think. And so I guess my advice would be to understand that's a gift and learn as much as you can, and not feel like you have to be anything. And one day when the time is right, you'll know who you are.
Which is something that comes up in that beautiful chapter that you have about the admittedly brief period in your life where you were Catholic, which is the chapter on discernment. And you spent some time with Sister Felicia, right? Going through the confirmation class. And it's almost like an interlude, right? I mean, it's sort of like the summer that I turned Catholic. What is that show that's on Amazon these days? Everybody's talking about. But there's this moment where you are very content to listen, to ask questions, to feel free to ask questions without being told to do anything or told to be anything. And it's interesting because it kind of takes a nun to help you get there, not the actual stepmother.
Yes, in retrospect, but I wish I had, I didn't have that level of understanding when I was a kid. So, I mean, it was a whole year that I spent my senior year of high school becoming Catholic and going through this conversion process, to the horror of my mother, and probably to the rest of my family, although they had just like the decency and kindness not to ever mention it. But yeah, I mean, I was a 17-year-old who spent their Sundays like 4 hours in church learning all of the different sacraments and things. And so it was a really confusing, and for me, I don't think I felt confused because I was like, this is my decision and this is what I'm doing.
Classic 17-year-old posture, right?
I was like, and then I heard my stepfather talking to my mom, and he was like, Sarah, this isn't gonna stick. Like, and I was like, yes, it is. And of course it didn't, because once I was on my own and didn't have it was really a search for belonging. I was trying to belong. I was trying to find acceptance from the people who didn't accept me for who I really was. And once I got to the end of that conversion process, I felt like there was going to be some magical switch that was turned on, and I was going to be like, I am fully actualized now. And of course, that's not what happened. I remember drinking the wine in the church and being like, this tastes like Mogan Day, like it just tastes like the wine that we drank on Shabbat. So it's like, that's interesting. But there was a nun who said, you must always respect your Jewish mother, your Jewish roots. And it stuck with me enough to write it down in my notebook at that time. But I don't know if I internalized that totally.
Well, it makes its way beautifully into sort of exploration of that season in your life. And I love that chapter because of how patient it is and how patient you are with your younger self, you know, as a writer. So the last question that I have for you goes back to what it means to write this book. And then we'll take a couple questions from the audience. But the last question I have for you really is about the experience of writing this, partly because I'm gonna say this real clumsily. All right, I'm gonna do what I can, but it's gonna be clunky. This book does not end on a cliffhanger. It does not end with a resolution. This book does not end with kind of everything wrapped up nice and tidily with a bow. The ending to your book, Lauren, is actually really interesting. It's almost left completely open. Now, things happen, right? There's kind of an early ill-advised marriage, which didn't last very long, and the readers can discover what that was like, and its attendant motorcycle rides for themselves. But there's some moving around. There's, of course, finding your forever family now, right? Which you're with your husband and your daughter. But there's a sense in which the core concerns and questions of the book, you almost leave deliberately unresolved. And I guess I'm kind of curious, what is it like to have a story arc, right? Where the overarching threads you intentionally leave frayed in the last pages. What is it like to write something like that?
I think that's always the challenge with memoir, because it's like the story keeps on going. You just have to kind of pick an arbitrary end point and say, well, that's tidy enough that we can end it there. But I didn't want to end it with some like great epiphany about what I've discovered about my identity and myself, because I really don't, I haven't had that epiphany. And I think the only thing I've gained is being more at peace with the fact that like none of us are ever going to be totally unified and whole as people. We're never going to be like, this is my identity. We're always just evolving. And of course, we're going to shift and change depending on where we are and who we're around and what role we're playing in that moment. And I'm just more okay with that. And so maybe that's why there's not that sense of tidy resolution, is because that would have felt really false to me. And so I don't know if I did that intentionally, maybe I just like ran out of steam. But I think it's because with memoir, it's not a self-help book. It's really just like, this is what I experienced, and, you know, I'll leave it at this tidy enough ending. So.
And what did I tell you guys at the top of the hour? But this book is a perfect combination of smart, curious, and humble, right? I mean, there's just a real humility to the way that Lauren writes, which makes this book such a joy. So let's take some questions. I want to hear what you guys have to ask. And I wonder if we should maybe start with maybe one question from the physical crowd, and then we'll get a question from the digital crowd, something like that. Yes, sir.
So I've never written memoir, but I would think that there's kind of a forensic side to it. And
Yeah.
and did an interview.
Mm-hmm.
You can't just run your own from memory, but it sounds like a lot of key players in your book have opposing narratives.
Yeah.
So, well, I mean, did you get mired in the research process? Like, oh, no, what really happened? Like, let's just this kind of kooky person's bias, and like, what can I really weave into a cohesive story that, you know, makes sense or something like that?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, because I do love the research aspect of it. And I loved being able to, I mean, there were even more documents that my stepdad sent me that I didn't end up using just because I didn't feel like they worked, but I spent a lot of time reading them and going back. And like my dad sent me 65 pounds of photos to sort through. And some of those were like really interesting and valuable, and others were just duplicates of people taking photos of the ground accidentally. So yeah, it's like you have to, you don't know what's going to be worthwhile until you start writing and something kind of lights that spark. There were people whose opinions I really like. My brother, for instance, is someone, he was, you know, always there. We were always traveling between our houses together. And so his opinion, his memories, and like corroborating things with him was really important to me because, you know, there was things that we both experienced at Dad's house that my mom would have no knowledge of. And he remembered some things that I had forgotten, and vice versa. And then like I did end up contacting Dr. Katz, and we talked on Zoom. So that was really interesting. And I ended up connecting with my ex-stepmother's sister-in-law. And that brought me different information, but I felt at a certain point like I have enough, and just to trust where I was going with it. Yeah.
Great question. Let's get one digital and one more from the back of the room after that.
So Jessica online asked, since you converted to Catholicism, did you have to unconvert back to Judaism? Where does that leave you?
Yeah, that's a really great question, because I've thought about that, and I think you have to like write there. It's a really complicated process. Like you have to contact a bishop and have them like cross your name off a list, and it just felt like so much work for what, you know, like if I don't consider myself Catholic, then why am I going to the trouble of having a bishop cross my name off a list? So I just decided to be at peace and let that part go. But yeah, I have thought through that.
You were the lapsiest lapsed Catholic of all time. In the back of the room. In the back of the room.
Hearing talk about our students is also kind of going with the concept, but more of the craft of writing. And I'm curious I'm always curious how people practice their art. And is there a routine that you can have pages any direction you have, but what is your relationship to the writing process?
Yeah, relationship to the writing process. For this book, I did not have a kid yet. And so every morning I woke up and worked on it. And so that was, I having a deadline for just the thesis project, just to get the draft out on paper, was really helpful. And so I was kind of making a little bit of progress every day on that. Since I've had a kid, just things are a little bit more chaotic and less predictable. Like she woke up at 4:45 this morning when I was like, I was going to get up at 5:30 to start writing. But so I just try to fit it in when I can. And working on longer projects hasn't been as easy. So I've done more of like shorter essays. I do like a Substack where I do a lot of editing work too, and like, arranging that. So, but I do find that if I really want to make headway, I have to do it first thing before my brain gets too overwhelmed with other tasks. Yeah.
Do you not check your phone until after you're done writing?
Yes. Yeah. And I really have like a low bar for myself right now. I'm like, if I can get 300 words down, because if you do 300 words, just a little bit, even not if it's every day, but like 4 times a week, you're going to have a lot of words by the end of the year. And so that's kind of, I have to think of things in like incremental, otherwise it, becomes too daunting.
It's a great question.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Let's get another question from digital.
Fred asked, what has your brother dealt with the issue of a Catholic father and a Jewish mother? How has he reacted to your memoir?
Yes, thank you, Fred. I let him read a draft before I published it. So he read the original thesis version, and I wanted to make sure, especially there's one chapter that's about our relationship and a lot about him, that I wanted to make sure if it felt accurate to him. So I did let him read a draft of that. He had a very different experience he had a very different approach to my dad and stepmom, we'll say. He was more like rebellious and didn't like to follow what he saw as like very arbitrary, restrictive rules. And so he tended to rebel, where I was like, I'm just going to put my head down and get out of here as soon as I can. But he considers himself Jewish as well. He never went through that sort of religious confusion, I guess, but he also never had a bar mitzvah when he was a kid for this just having watched me have my bat mitzvah and seeing the backlash. So he decided not to do that and had one as later as an adult. So that was one major difference. Yeah.
Thank you for asking that question, Fred. I'd actually been curious about that very thing myself, was what was Sam's reaction to all of this? Because you guys do seem to have taken, very, very different tracks. There's a
Yeah.
memorable piece of graffiti that Sam leaves
Yeah.
in your father and stepmother's old house. I'm not sure that we can actually share that piece.
Say it
of
out
graffiti.
loud. Yeah.
For that, you got to buy the book, folks. You got to buy the book. Let's get another question. Either one from the room or digital. Yes.
Oh, yeah. So I had nothing to do with the cover. That was the publisher, and I think she did a brilliant job. I liked I said I like collage covers, and she just went with it. And the image is actually like an 18th century print, like an art print. It looked like a brain or like coral or something. And then there is a fish on it, which is, I always like the little irony because I lived in a landlocked state and there's this fish, but there's a very like short fish tank scene in the book. And then so I think that's what she was drawing from. But then at my book launch in Jackson, I have a friend who's an ichthyologist, and he was like, "Is that a black molly?" And I was like, "Yeah, it is a black molly." And he was like, "Well, you know about black mollies." And I was like, "I really don't. I just had them in my fish tank." And he said that black mollies have evolved so they can survive in freshwater and saltwater, and they develop like distinct characteristics depending on what their environment is. And he was like, "That's the perfect metaphor for the book." So I stole that, and now I tell people that because it really is. Yeah.
That is a great question to end on. Thank you so much for that. Now, before we end, we have a little bit of thanks, and Lauren is going to read for us one more time. So I just wanted to say thank you all for coming this evening. This has been phenomenal. This has been such a joy to get to hear from Lauren herself about the creation of this marvelous book. Thank you to the museum. They're just wonderful hosts. We've been so grateful to be able to be here and see the amazing collections. Next time you're in New Orleans, you know where to come and visit. Lauren, will you take us home with the reading?
Thank you so much, Ben. And thank you, Lizzie, and everyone here at the museum and folks for coming tonight. So this is a very short reading, and it's in honor of the upcoming High Holy Days. So this is a parenting diary chapter. So I'll start with a little bit of my mom's section, and then it will go into my voice. So this is Parenting Diary Pancake House. So this is my mother. September 27th, 2000. Sent a letter to Matt regarding Yom Kippur and asking him to drop off the children at my house at 9 a.m. on October 9th because we were going to early services. October 2nd, 2000. Received a long letter from Matt, faxed to my office with some strange allegations. At the end of the letter, he wrote, "Also, please note that since you are keeping Lauren and Sam out of school on Monday, October 9th, I will drop off the children at your house at 10 a.m. just as we did during the summer months." October 9th, 2000. The kids were dropped off at 10:15 a.m. and Crystal had taken them to the pancake house for a big breakfast before Yom Kippur services. We missed the 9 a.m. services we were going to go to. Okay, now then this is me. Inside the pancake house, the walls are painted lingonberry blue. The smell of bacon grease and sugared apples makes mouths water, makes empty stomachs groan with longing. Pancakes are all we want, only pancakes, day and night, for a whole week, a whole month, an eternity. We are soothed by the clatter of dishes, the din of conversation, the circular motion of the busboy's rag as he clears another table of syrupy debris. A waiter walks by holding a giant Dutch baby pancake, topped with powdered sugar for a table to share. We all pause to coo and stare at it hungrily, as if it were a real baby on a plate, its pale, hot flesh steaming in the morning light. We order glasses of orange juice, steaming cups of coffee. We fiddle with the packets of sugar, the little carafes of syrups, our waiting filled with a sense of purpose. Homework will be done. Parents won't fight. Sins will be absolved. Pancakes loaded with chocolate chips, studded with blueberries, stuffed with coconut, with pineapple, with bacon, topped with whipped butter that melts in rivulets, pooling in the crevices of the warm, fluffy, cooked to perfection batter. We jab forkfuls of sticky softness into our mouths, chew on sausage and bacon until our jaws hurt from the effort, until we feel sick. In the pancake house, time ceases to exist. Time never existed in the first place. In the pancake house, God never created heaven nor earth, nor the fish of the sea, nor the creatures of the land, nor darkness nor light. In the pancake house, there is no dawn nor dusk, no such thing as Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. God only created pancakes. Polish that off, my stepmother says. One more bite. There you go. She wants us to be full on this day of emptiness, repentance. She wants us to forget where and who we came from. Under her watchful eye, we stuff ourselves with the bounty before us like the Israelites who, believing themselves to be forsaken, shaped a golden calf and worshipped at its hooves. We emerge into the morning light, fattened and blinking. Only then do we remember our mother, her hunger. That's it.
Ladies and gentlemen, Lauren Rhoades.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks so much for being here. Thanks everybody online. Bye.
If you want to find out what the graffiti said in the book, you gotta buy the book.
Not safe for Zoom.
Not safe for.
Thank you so much.
Pleasure.
Thank you.